the left side of the Malstrom are controls to modulate parameters using the mod wheel, the pitch wheel, and by how hard or soft notes are played. The polyphony digits that are displayed shows how many voices or keys can be played together simultaneously. Set this to 1 if you want a monophonic setting, which will only allow one note to be played at a time. The Legato button works in both monophonic and polyphonic modes. When Legato is on in the monophonic mode, holding down a note and pressing a second note will allow the second note to play and will stop the first note from playing. When you release the second note, the first note will begin to play again. In a polyphonic mode, the notes played separately will each trigger the oscillator amp envelope, but when playing notes together or joining notes together, the oscillator amp envelope will only trigger once for all the notes. The velocity section is where you can control 6 synth parameters with note velocity. Note velocity is how hard or soft a note or key is played. The parameters that velocity can control are oscillator A's amp level, oscillator B's amp level, the filter envelope amount, attack level for one or both oscillators, the shift amount for one or both oscillators, and the mod amount for one or both oscillators. You can set whether the velocity will control a parameter positively or negatively. Turn right to positively affect or left to negatively affect. If, for example, you wanted the level of oscillator A to get louder when a note or key is played harder, turn oscillator A level to the right, which applies positive values. If you want the level of oscillator A to get quieter when a key or note is played harder, turn it to the left, which applies a negative value. Positive values for the filter envelope will increase or emphasize the filter envelope. Negative values flip the filter envelope parameters upside down, and the more negative value that's applied, the more this will be emphasized. The bottom 3 parameters can be assigned to both oscillator A and B, or just A or just B. The attack parameter will allow velocity to control the attack level for oscillator A and B. Positive values will increase the attack time, while negative values will decrease the attack time. This also applies for the shift control of either oscillator A or oscillator B, or both. The mod parameter allows velocity to control the amount of modulation applied to either oscillator A, oscillator B, or both. The mod wheel section works the same way as the velocity section, but instead of velocity, we use the modulation wheel to control certain parameters. The parameters that can be modulated are the index control, the shift control, the filter cutoff, and the modulator's amount control. Similar to the previous velocity section, moving the parameters to the right sets a positive value, while moving them to the left sets a negative value. Move the mod wheel up to hear the effect. The selector switch beside the mod parameter is for selecting mod A, both, or mod B when using the mod parameter. Going around the back of the Malstrom device, you will see more connections to be used to and from the Malstrom. Starting from the left, there is the sequence control CV connections, which are on most of the synthesizer, sampler and drum machine devices. Gate input is for receiving a CV signal to trigger the Malstrom's note on or off from another device such as a matrix device. The CV input is for receiving a CV signal to control the Malstrom's note pitch from another device. The modulation input section is for triggering and controlling certain Malstrom parameters from other devices or even from its own modulation outputs, which are beside the modulation inputs. So if you wanted a second Malstrom's modulator to modulate the first Malstrom's pitch, all you have to do is create a cable from the second Malstrom's Mod A modulation output to the first Malstrom's pitch modulation input. The switches beside the inputs allow you to send the incoming CV signal to either oscillator A, both, or B, or modulator A, both, or B. The trim pots beside the inputs allow you to control how much of the incoming signal will affect its corresponding parameter. The main outputs output the Malstrom's main audio signal, which is typically used when it connects itself to the master mixer. The oscillator output bypasses the Malstrom's oscillators without them being sent to the filter section, so the filters have no effect. The audio inputs are for processing other devices' audio signal within the Malstrom using its modulators, filters and shaper. The processed external signal will be mixed with the Malstrom's own voices, if it is activated. When a signal is connected to the audio input, the signal is routed to an extra internal filter. This filter's envelope is triggered each time any of the other filter envelopes are triggered. So in basic terms, the extra filter envelope is triggered every time a note is played on the Malstrom. can also route the Malstrom into itself, which might sound like a useless idea, but it does have many handy uses, but it will mean that the filters will not be used to process the audio output signal. However, connecting the oscillator outputs to the audio inputs, for example, will allow the filter envelope to trigger on each note played. It's also handy if you want to process the Malstrom through an external effects device back into the Malstrom. One of the best ways to learn to use the Malstrom is simply by practicing. It might seem a little technical at first, but by trial and error and simply experimenting, you'll be able to create some amazing sounds with this unique synthesizer.